There you go. Good evening and welcome to our April 27th Planning Commission meeting. Just a few things to point out, especially for our attendees. It looks like we have several this evening. We are broadcasting this live on channel 27 and as well on PC TV's website. With a few etiquette items, the chair will open up and allow the general public comment as well as public comment during these agenda items that we have on the agenda this evening. If you want to speak, I will recognize by those raising their hands first and allow them the 3-minute speech or time frame. If you're calling in by telephone, you can push *6 to raise and unraise your hand and *9 to mute and unmute yourself. Otherwise, your phones, tablets, etc. do have the little hand raising icon. I don't believe I did not have we had no extra public comment this evening that was sent out. So with that, I will thank everyone in our community for their patience during our remote meetings and hand this over to Chair Reddick to officially start our meeting this evening.
Thank you, Bridget. It's my pleasure to open this April 27th, 2021 meeting of the Half Moon Bay Planning Commission, the first since the historic April 15th certification of our new land use plan by the California Coastal Commission. So if everyone would be welcome to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. First item on our agenda is consideration of the minutes of our last meeting, which was April 13th. Commissioner Hernandez?
Commissioner Reddick.
Roll call.
Roll, yeah.
I did it again.
It's okay. We'll do it quick. Commissioner Benjamin?
I, Métis.
Commissioner Hernandez?
I am present.
Vice Chair Polgar?
Here.
And Chair Reddick?
Present.
Commissioner Gorn is absent with an excused absence this evening.
I'm going to have to get a sign that says roll call and tape it on the top of my screen.
It's quite all right.
Is there any commissioner discussion of the minutes of our April 13th meeting?
I have no comments.
Commissioner Benjamin.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, I think that most of the comments were well captured in the notes on the hearing on the property at the back of Terrace. I just thought we should clarify that if memory serves, we talked about conditioning the permit so that the uses in a clearly demarked riparian buffer zone were restricted to those things that are permitted in the riparian buffer / riparian zone, riparian buffer zone. I think we didn't talk about the structure of the fence, but I think we did say that we wanted to see one. I remember seeing a reference to a split rail fence, so we got most of it.
That seems reasonable. Is that feedback clear enough for staff to augment the minutes in that way?
I believe so, yeah.
With that, I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Is there a second?
I second the motion.
Thank you.
Commissioner Benjamin?
Yes.
Commissioner Hernandez?
Aye.
Vice Chair Polgar?
Yes.
And Chair Reddick?
Yes.
Motion moved.
Excellent. This brings us to the point on the agenda for every Planning Commission meeting where we welcome public comment on any issue that public might care to bring up with the commission, other than the agendized item that is for discussion in just a minute. But if any members of the public would like to address the commission on anything other than the agenda items, please raise your hand virtually.
I'm I'm seeing none.
All right, then I will not open public hearing at this point and move instead to our first agenda item, which is our public study session on the proposed short-term vacation rental ordinance, and turn it over to staff for presentation.
Thank you, Chair Reddick. I'm happy to get this started. I'm Jill Ickes, the Community Development Director. We see quite a few people in the room tonight for this item, and we want to reassure everybody there'll be plenty of time for public comment. Before I get going, I'd like to confirm that you can see the slide, the whole first slide. Okay, great.
Yes.
We're set and ready to go. Joe Butcher and I will be making a brief presentation. This is the third of 3 study sessions you've had in 2021 on short-term rentals, and we've got just a couple items to come back to you with tonight, you having already really done quite a bit of a dive into the details. We'll just briefly cover background. I'm going to discuss a few updates and clarifications that we've made since your February 23rd meeting. And then Joe's going to present different options for caps on the number of short-term rentals. This is something you asked for more information about that at your last meeting. And then next steps and kind of general timelines for those. The key thing in the background that's changed, has already been noted tonight, is that the city's land use plan was certified by the Coastal Commission on April 15th. We had already cited policy from the what was then the draft land use plan about short-term rentals, and we've been mindful of that policy, hoping it was going to be coming forward. That is now completely relevant to your review, and we will be sure to show you when you come into public hearing mode how short-term rental policy in the certified land use plan provides guidance for the ordinance that you've been working so hard on. The other thing, just of note, this draft ordinance, you've seen a few different evolving versions of it. What you have in your packet tonight, attachment 1 is the ordinance that you saw on February 23rd with all of the proposed changes at that point. They were accepted, and then anything new is shown in strike through underline. I also found a mistake about an exception for primary residence. We were supposed to remove that for your February 23rd meeting, and I had missed it. So you'll see a little extra strike through on that topic area. That's something you've already provided guidance about. So really, all these first bullet points in white we've covered, and we'll be focusing on the caps. Before getting to that, though, there were some smaller items that we wanted to hone in on. You discussed potential different allowances for our mixed-use districts, specifically 2 of them, 2 of the 4. Commercial downtown, which is really focused around Main Street, and the general commercial district, which is tends to be located around the intersection of Highway 1 and 92, where most of the city's shopping centers are located. We don't have a lot of housing in the CG district, but there is quite a bit of housing in this commercial downtown zone. This does not include commercial residential. Commercial residential is a transition zone that is meant to really emphasize housing and very kind of quiet commercial uses. So it's we're proposing to treat it similarly to any other R1 or 2 zoning district or the CVS. There's not very much housing at all in the commercial visitor serving district. The idea here was to have limited allowances for short-term rentals in mixed use. We're suggesting just one unit, and to not require primary residence in the commercial downtown district for single family and these mixed use units. This means that you could lose single family home in that district, in particular the commercial downtown, completely over to short-term rental. It would be a housing unit out of your housing inventory. We're proposing it this way because it would have a limited impact on multifamily units and the types of units that are really very important to maintain in the housing stock for lower income households, units that are more affordable, and really the fact that Half Moon Bay does not have a lot of rental housing. So we're proposing that the duplex and triplex limitations that you've already looked at would continue to apply to these two zones, which means to have a short-term rental in a duplex or a triplex, either of those would need to be owner occupied in one of the units. The idea here was to really support what we've heard our real estate folks call our mom and pop landowners, and to be supportive to them, but try to make sure that you keep those units in your housing stock. So you already looked at that code. It had a 90-day limit on it and a few other caveats around it. We wouldn't propose to change that for commercial downtown. Multifamily, 4 units and over, we're also continuing to encourage you to not allow short-term rentals in those kinds of developments. We don't have a lot of them, and it's really important. So there's a lot of clarity about that, we think, in the code revision that you're seeing tonight. Of course, we're here for your input, and we're hoping that we got that right. What this does allow is development existing or proposed with mixed use with more than a couple units. One of them could be a short-term rental without primary residence requirements. So that means it would possibly be an STR all the time. And we think that's consistent with the intent of a vibrant mixed-use downtown-oriented zone in particular. And it might come up from time to time in the general commercial district, but probably not quite as much. The other, this is really a clarification. The proposed ordinance has a section about where short-term rentals could be allowed. And it also lists several areas where they would be proposed to be prohibited. We added recreational vehicles to the prohibited list because we wanted to be really clear. They are not cited as being allowed, but we don't want there to be an assumption that they aren't prohibited. They aren't allowed. They never have been allowed, and so we're just being clear. I picked this up when we were studying other codes, looking at caps, and I saw how it was done in other cities, and I thought it was good practice to just be more overt about it the way some of the other cities were. We also are concerned about any development, no matter how big or small, that has any deed restricted affordable unit in it. In such a case, such units were probably subsidized or a requirement of the developer. They are precious, and we want to really honor those developments for management of the affordable units and the occupancy for a residential living environment without the intrusion of short-term rentals in those cases. So we wanted to add this clarifying language about that as well. And there were a couple comments at your last study session about parking exceptions. And the parking exception code that's already in the parking portion of the ordinance, 1836, which applies broadly, as well as additional findings that need to be made for parking exceptions in the commercial downtown district are both relevant to this if the commission was interested in considering a parking exception under certain circumstances. All of those codes have findings already prepared, and they outline the process. It's a planning commission discretion. And we just added some language to the draft short-term rental code to be really clear about how parking exceptions could be considered. It is possible, and where you'd go into the code to make sure that they're being evaluated correctly. And with that, this is my last slide. We talked about this a little bit at in your February 23rd session as well. There were questions about properties with accessory dwelling units and the combination of the single family home and what the occupancy of that is, primary residence versus not, and the ADU, and when could either the single family home or the ADU be used as a short-term rental, and under what circumstances. This is in your staff report here, just to make it fit on the slide. PR is primary residence. It's abbreviated here in this column. Really, the upshot here is that if the ADU had been used as a short-term rental in December 2018, according to the city standards at the time, which was paying the TOT and a number of other things, and was actually grandfathered through that ADU ordinance that was certified by the Coastal Commission, then it could continue to be used as a short-term rental under those circumstances, provided that the use is ongoing. If the use is discontinued, other than for COVID, and we need to figure out how to deal with the gap that the health orders have caused, then it can no longer be used that way. Your ADU ordinance code, per really the best practices as considered throughout California guidance that we've reviewed through HCD and our local 21 Elements group, is to not allow ADUs to be used for short-term rentals. The whole intent is for them to be used as housing units, and that's why all these state laws are so dramatically encouraging their production. And then the other point is, if the unit, whatever unit involved, other than a grandfathered ADU, if it doesn't have primary residency, then it wouldn't be allowed, just like a single family home without a primary residence as proposed in this ordinance. And you discussed that in particular at your first study session in February about whether or not an exception to that should be considered. You really batted it around and asked us to take that out, and we have taken that out, and I've already made a reference to that tonight about how that is struck through in your draft code for your consideration tonight. Of course, remembering this is a study session, we're not yet to hearing, but we're hoping we're getting close. That's all I have for clarifications and what we call updates and tweaks, and we'll move into Joe Butcher, our community preservation specialist. Joe's going to discuss what he has come up upon in digging into caps.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? This little head nod work. Okay. Yeah, so last time we met, we talked about getting some research for you about caps in other cities and other coastal cities as well, and explore the option of what does work, what may not work, and what might work for us. So we kind of narrowed it down to a few different places. Again, trying to stay coastal. We looked all over the state, but it just made sense for us to stay in the coastal zone. And we come up with several different ones. So if you look here, we got Trinidad that has a very small population. So Trinidad has a cap of about 31 STRs. Now, to explain their caps, they do not have any caps for home shares in other districts. The caps that they do have are just based on 2 districts. That would be their residential and full-time residential in 2 different zoning districts. Everything else they allow for. So they just allow for 31 in these 2 districts. Mendocino, this isn't Mendocino County, this is the town of Mendocino. They only allow for 30. They have a very small population. This 30 takes in 10 vacation home rentals, which would be the same as a whole house unhosted, and then 20 hosted. And that's 30 altogether. They don't grandfather anything in. It's 30, you make the mark or you don't. Carpinteria is an interesting one because it's the most similar to us in size, and roughly their cap kind of is based off of a overlay district. And this is something interesting that we've talked about with different districts, how they do a certain percentage per neighborhood or a certain number per neighborhood. And the way the Carpinteria does it is they have 4 different districts with specified hard number caps for those districts, and each one different, which comes up to 218 caps for those overlay districts. However, they do allow for additional short-term rentals outside of that overlay area. Moving on, we have a little bit larger scale, moving down to Laguna Beach, which again, you see that there are a bigger population there. And as it stands right now, the way that theirs is presented, they can allow up to 465, and that's 300 non-home share and 165 home share. And they're trying to cut it off with no more beyond that. And actually right now, at this moment, they're no longer accepting any applications for a short-term rental. Santa Cruz, now I'm going to kind of jump between Santa Cruz City and Santa Cruz County, but we'll start with Santa Cruz City. Obviously, larger population. Their cap is at 550. That includes 300 that they've already had grandfathered in, and then a max of only 250 new. Again, they've already met this threshold. They're not accepting any more applications. Everything beyond then becomes first come, first serve, or just put into a queue and waited until either the grandfathers discontinue operating or one of the 250 discontinues. Now, what's interesting with Santa Cruz County, which I don't have listed on here, but I wanted to touch base on, is Santa Cruz County, they actually allow for unlimited outside of, I think they have 3 different zones, and they're all coastal zones. And the way that they have the caps on these 3 different zones in the county are based off of a 10 to 15% on these zones, which might be comprised of 1 or 2 neighborhoods. Now, recently, Santa Cruz, I believe in October or December, the county of Santa Cruz has gone back to the Coastal Commission and are trying to adjust their caps to a hard number because they said that a percentage of neighborhoods was actually too challenging for them to be able to regulate, and it made more sense to them to just put a hard cap. That hasn't gone through yet. That's just their proposal. So that's just another type of cap option that we've looked at as percentage in comparison to hard number. And lastly, we've got Newport Beach, again, large population. Now, Newport Beach has proposed a cap entirely at 1,550. They proposed it right now. It's gone to their city council. It's approved. They're waiting to go to the Coastal Commission to see if this is going to work for them. But currently active, they've got about 1,430, well, about 1,500 in total operating, but 1,436 that are in their coastal zone and 64 outside of their coastal zone. We're waiting to see, and we'll keep an eye on to see if this goes through or if they just got shot down once it gets to Coastal Commission. Moving on from there. So this is a neat little map we put together. All the little dots that you see are all at one time operating short-term rentals. Currently, this isn't all operating short-term rentals, but this will just give you an overview of where they were active at one point in time. And you can see, you know, the larger areas which we would expect are the west of Highway 1 neighborhoods, such as the Arleta Park, Alsace, and Miramar, and a little bit down Ocean Colony. Moving on from there. So we've really looked and dived into all the existing short-term rentals that we had in town, and that's west of Highway 1, east of Highway 1, and we really kind of narrowed it down to the most active neighborhoods, to where we have it highlighted here. As you can see, Miramar and Alsace-Lorraine are about 6.5% of their houses in that area are operating as a short-term rental or have, as well as almost 6% at Arleta Park. So those are a little bit higher, but then your other neighborhoods, Casa del Mar, Ocean Colony, sitting around 2%. And that brings us to our next one. Next slide is just an option. So as Jill discussed a little earlier, we don't recommend any caps for the CD or the CG zoning districts. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. What we feel is a good idea is to potentially, at this time, not recommend a cap, but monitor and visit how many, basically what the influx of applications may end up being for short-term rentals, and have the option codified to be able to come back and say, okay, if this doesn't work, let's put a cap. If that's not something that we're interested in at the time, then we're looking at two different other options here. If we do a citywide cap, and that's excluding the downtown and commercial, we're looking at a 3 to 4% cap entirely, which approximately would, it'd come up to about 150 to 200 short-term rentals. Now, keep in mind, the most that we ever had operating at one time was only 94. So that gives room for reasonable growth if people have the interest. And it also allows to have a fail-safe, like you guys have discussed before, so that we don't tip over that side. Another option, again, similar to the Santa Cruz, is to have neighborhood caps at 7 to 10%. So again, Alsace and Miramar were about 6.5%. So about 7 to 10% still allows for a little bit of growth without it just being a massive influx, and still could keep us realistically close to that 200 to, a little between 150 to 200 short-term rental cap for the whole city.
Joe, I'm going to add. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to let the audience know that the 102 that we had ever had citywide is on the order of 2% of the residential units in town that would be associated with that. So it's pretty low percentage. And Joe, are you going to talk about our discussion with the coastal staff?
Yes.
Go ahead.
All right. And so Jill and I did meet with Coastal Commission, and we kind of just really just tested their waters and their temperature on where they feel about caps, especially in the coastal zone. And, we didn't get a lot from them. It really didn't seem like they're interested in that. So the feedback that we received was, if we're suggesting a cap, then we really should do our research on it, see how it could be beneficial and supportive, but and why we would need a cap. And at the same time, we would need to provide for additional capacity over what we currently offer. So it's a trade-off, and we really almost have to offer something up if we're going to take those caps. And again, we didn't receive a lot of feedback on what they're looking for, and this could potentially kind of snowball into a large economic, basically getting a new consultant in here to do a full economic discovery of how this could be beneficial. It could be a larger process, and again, for something that may not really be recommended based upon kind of the feeling that we received in this conversation. Moving on, so with our next steps, as you see, we hope that, this third time in 2021 and however many times that we've touched base on this, that we're kind of narrowing it down. We hope to prepare a final ordinance to you guys here soon, get this to a public hearing by May or June. If we get that pushed through, hopefully try to get this to City Council again by June or July, and based on any feedback or comments or directives that we may get from the council, have this ready to submit to the Coastal Commission. Yeah, Jill, I don't know if you want to take this one over or you want to finish up.
Sure. No, I think we're there. Thanks, Joe. And of course, if commissioners have any questions about our presentation, please don't hesitate to ask them. I will note that our San Francisco office staff did not have a lot of experience with any of the applications for caps, because we really don't have a lot of jurisdictions out of the North Central District that have done this. So they really provided that guidance of don't don't make it too tight. You've got to have room. And as Joe was saying, you may need to have an economic study to really justify doing that. So we can talk a little bit more about what's involved in that, and then options around what monitoring could mean and what that looks like. And that's where we are. We have all of our backup slides from previous meetings, but I think for now we'll just take that down and let you get at your questions and then public comment.
Well, thank you, Jill and Joe. I see Commissioner Benjamin's hand up first for clarifying questions.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I thought the oral presentation was clear. I had questions about some of the text of the proposed ordinance and, more of the written material. Is it appropriate to ask those questions now, or do you prefer that we maintain a focus on the oral presentation for clarifying questions and discuss this in the context of after public hearing?
I wasn't sure if that was a question for staff or for the chair.
I can hear from both of you.
Well, from staff's perspective, I think it's in the public interest to ask your clarifying questions about anything that's in the record. And so if it's the written materials, these are things that members of the public have come to comment on. So I would hope that we could hear all of it before they begin.
Very good. Through the chair with no objection.
That makes sense. Yep.
Okay, so I just wanted to drill into a couple of areas. I appreciated the discussion about the amount of water consumption during rental periods. And I just wondered whether the language was intended to actually measure the consumption during the period that the place wasn't just, 300, let's say that they could have a potential of 180 days and maybe 4 days it's rented or something like that. We're actually talking about tracking water consumption during the period that it is physically occupied with short-term rentals. And I'm wondering about the mechanics of being able to, measure and implement that. People can look at the water meter, right? But I was unclear on whether it was that or we anticipated mechanically doing some kind of pro rata. In other words, is there a flaw of averages looming here to understand this?
Would you like answers as we go?
Please.
Okay, great. So through the chair, the intent here was to ensure that properties with short-term rentals are generally using water within the range of what a single-family home is using, single-family home plus an ADU, for example. And so it was not to get into the nits of what's happening with which days is it being rented and how much water is being used then. It's looking at the whole year and trying to ensure that water consumption for that property is within the realm of what's happening with any other similar property in the neighborhood, within the range of really what we modeled in the land use plan.
And is there any mechanism associated with, if we get into a situation where we're rationing or something like that, is there some mechanism to adapt to accommodate that, since a year might be a long time in the context of a drought?
Well, if there is water rationing imposed on water customers obviously through the water district, it's going to be imposed on everyone, whether they have a short-term rental or not. So I don't think that this is really going to be something that would give somebody the ability to use more water than a water rationing requirement would.
Okay, I'll stop on that line for now. Maybe pick that up after public hearing. Then in the discussion of how enforcement work, I noticed that we struck out the conversation of the Planning Commission and we cited a reference to Title IV as the mechanism through which violations might be addressed. And I took a short look at it, and one of the things I noticed was that the violation was going to explain why there were really dangerous conditions. I forget the exact language. It was serious and dangerous to the community or something. And I want to be sure that there's harmony between invoking that and the preambles or whatever that talk about the reason we're regulating short-term rentals, so that if there were a notice of violation, that it was consistent with Title IV and consistent with the short-term rental ordinance. Is the question clear, or is it still a little vague?
No, it's clear, and I'll handle answering this one. The main tool to address violations of the short-term rental ordinance is actually through the process of either suspending or revoking the registration. And so it's a little bit different than other types of code enforcement, where we're primarily looking at mechanisms to remove the authorization for a property owner to engage in this type of use. And in what we found in other jurisdictions is that tool is quite effective, especially because then it can allow the city to work with hosting platforms to pull down the listings. And so we typically don't need to resort out to the violations and enforcement of the remainder of the city's code. That would be reserved for situations where you really do see health and safety violations, certainly, which could be someone continuing to operate without a registration. And the reason why that is a potential health and safety violation is that the city then has no oversight over how that short-term rental is operating, because they're operating outside of the code. So I think they're harmonized.
So it's a cascade from the easy administrative to, because it's no longer authorized, it could be dangerous. Who knows what's going on?
Exactly. That's
okay,
correct.
Thank you. That's helpful. Then in another sort of technical question, I was looking over the exhibit that talks about where I think there were a couple of tables where we were describing whether the new rows for short-term rentals were okay or no. And the okays seem to suggest that it was okay by right, or that without a permit, I think was the language in the ordinance. And of course, what we're doing with this authorization, we're not calling it exactly a permit, but we're requiring people to register, and we're telling them that they can't operate until we've told them you're fine. So I'm trying to figure out how that process of they register and we tell them it's okay fits between okay by right and permit required. Can you clarify that for me, please?
Sarah, I was going to pull the code up. Yeah, hang on.
Take an initial answer of it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Which is that the way that the tables make this distinction is between things that require use permits and things that do not require use permits. And so maybe there's a way, we'll look at this, but we could potentially adjust the okay definition to say that it's allowed without a use permit, and note that a registration may still be required to make that more clear.
I think we've done that. If I could, let me highlight what we have here, because I do think the structure of the table covers this. Anytime there are additional requirements associated with any of the uses in one of these use tables, they come below in the code. And of course, this is only an excerpt because we're focused in on changes that are needed to implement STRs. So we're not showing all the other uses here, but it's okay. It doesn't need a use permit, but you do need to go into the table. So for example, for short-term vacation rental in the CR zoning district, we'd go to E5 and it kicks out and shows us that we have to go to 1806025, which is the ordinance that you've been working on, which requires registration. So
I got it. I totally got that. I appreciate it.
Okay.
It was different. I was trying to reconcile that with the okay without permit above. And maybe there's no ambiguity. I see both of them, but without permit felt pretty permissive, I guess. But I didn't mean to make a judgment. I just wanted to be sure I understood what was going on. And
yeah,
I think there's similar language in the other tables, right?
there is, and this is how the whole table's set up, and it's relevant to use permits specifically.
Okay. Yeah, maybe in context it makes more sense. I admit I didn't look at it in the larger context. One last sort of logistics question, and then I'll yield. My colleagues have been very patient. So short-term rentals is a visitor serving function. We're talking about doing it in residential contexts, but it is visitor serving. There's nothing here that suggests access to visitor serving resources like allocations of valued resources like water or something like that would be associated with the visitor serving. The project would have to stand on its own, get the residential allocation for water or whatever, and then the visitor serving use appears, but it doesn't create a mechanism for tapping into visitor serving. I'm sure that's the case, but I just wanted to call it out.
It's the case. We could be more overt in our coding for it. It is an accessory use. It is not the primary use of the property in any of the ways that it could possibly be coming forward. It's always in association with a primary use of a property, which is residential, as a non-priority use and subject to non-priority utility requirements. So I don't mind being more overt about it the way we were with recreational vehicles, for example. So I think we could add that in, and we appreciate the comment.
Yeah, I totally did not mean to opine. I was just asking the question. I'll come back to that, but I appreciate your thinking about it. And I think most of my other comments are going to be less clarifying and more, definition of long-term tenant. When the long-term tenant is, in the table that Joe put up earlier, there was a row associated with the long-term tenant being in the main home. It was what to do. And long-term tenant definition in this context was someone who's there more than a year. Or what was the definition?
It would be anyone that is, it could be, I think, shorter than a year, but anyone that is there and holding sort of a longer term tenancy. So probably at least 6 months, more likely a year, possibly even more than a year. We were just trying to make the point that someone has to be using that as a primary residence. And so they have to meet the definition of it being their primary residence, meaning it's a place that they return home to, that they get their mail and utility bills and registration at. And so we didn't include a precise definition, but it would be tied back to that primary residence definition.
Okay, I think I'll hold off for now. Thank you for your patience with all of my minutia here. I yield back to the chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Benjamin. Commissioner Hernandez, did I see your hand a little while ago for clarifying questions?
You did. I was going back to Jill's presentation, not the actual code, just because it's a point of clarification. If you look at the table you presented, we had several use cases around when are short-term rentals allowed, and I think just for the point of clarification to the public, that table, I think the bottom cell in the middle is, can you pull up that presentation, Jill? Can you share your screen? It's actually it's also in the staff report as well. It's page 9.
You're talking about the ADU clarification, right? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, no, it's the, keep going. There we go. This section down here, if it's no one's primary residence, the ADU part doesn't matter. It's just never allowed. I just think that the table's not written correctly. That's all. If it's no one's primary residence, and it's never allowed, correct?
That's correct. So if
the table's just misleading, it's confusing, that's all.
I think in the staff report, you don't see maybe the bars are a little bit confusing, but what the not allowed in that last row is intended to show is that it's not allowed for any of those 3 categories. Not allowed for an ADU primary residence owner, not allowed for a primary residence of the long-term tenant, and not allowed if it's no one's primary residence.
Yeah, I think it's a formatting thing through the chair. So these 3, whoops, sorry, every time I click, each time there's these 3 categories over and over again, and they have the same conclusions. So no one's primary residence, not allowed, not allowed. This answer translates across this whole bottom third of the table categories. Take a look at the staff report. I think
I'm looking at the staff report.
Okay, it might be better there.
I'm just confused by what this is trying to say, and I spent a few minutes trying to digest. I mean, I get the intent that if the main house is no one's primary residence, and if the ADU is no one's primary residence, then the short-term rental of the main house is not allowed, and the short-term rental of the ADU is not allowed. I think that's what you're trying to say, but that's not what the table says. When this comes back before us as a hearing item, it would be great to just take a look at this and make sure it's clear for the public. That's all. I'm sorry.
I understood the table to mean, as Jill was saying, that in all 3 cases, those rules would apply. But we can certainly spend more time on that if you still think it needs it. Do you have other?
Yeah. I understood that the guidance we got from our local coastal commission folks was, if you're going to have a cap, you're going to have to justify it. If we have concerns about the character of our neighborhoods kind of getting overwhelmed with short-term rentals, the point I think I understand, if you could just clarify, Jill, is that having a primary residence, either in the main house or an accessory dwelling unit, really limits a neighborhood being taken over by short-term rentals. And more importantly, if we look at the complaints that we have heard, the complaints we have heard by and large are in situations where there's no primary resident on the property. Is that a fair statement?
I would say, yeah. I mean, the complaints I get are never unhosted. So I think exactly what you're saying, if we're looking to try to maintain the integrity of a neighborhood and it not be, overrun with short-term rentals by offering it as primary residency, would ultimately take care of a lot of that issue. And anything else hosted, you never have issues with that because you have somebody on site.
Okay, and the recommendation here is to move forward with the primary residence as a requirement of either the main house or the ADU, and punt the decision on a specific cap to a later date. Is that fair?
Correct. I mean, the recommendation I think that we're looking at is that ultimately is to not have an idealistic cap at the moment, and just see what the influx would be once we actually have an application process and how many we get, and then see kind of give ourselves a date or a time for us to revisit it and see if it's working, or if maybe we do need to implement something a hard number or percentage cap.
And speaking to one of those neighborhoods that has a preponderance of short-term rentals in it, can you just summarize for the viewers listening at home the kind of teeth this ordinance has for bad apples? So if somebody has multiple complaints, is not doing what they're supposed to do, can you just clarify concisely for the public what the penalty is and how long that penalty is applicable?
Do you want me to walk through that?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, this relates back to the primary tool that the city will have in place, which is through the registration process. So if you end up with someone that where there's complaints that are warranted and a citation is issued, then once you get to 2 of those citations in place, then the city has the ability to revoke the registration. And there's a process for that. It's done by the city manager, and there's an appeals process. So it could take a little bit of time, but we want to make sure that there's appropriate due process for the owners. Once that happens and the registration is revoked, then the city can also work with hosting platforms to get those listings taken down, so that there will no longer be an ability for folks to book on at least the most popular sites. I know there's a lot of sites out there, and it isn't always easy to get some of these more startup-y type places to get the postings taken down, but certainly we can work with Airbnb and VRBO and Expedia Group to get those removed. And in most cases, that solves the problem. I've been involved in a number of code enforcement cases in a number of other jurisdictions, and using that registration revocation process solves it. If that doesn't, and the person still continues operating, then we move into a code enforcement type situation where you're looking at imposition of fines and other administrative citations that the city might have. Certainly in the very worst cases, you could look at securing a preliminary injunction or permanent injunction against the use. But in my experience, those are relatively unnecessary.
And the duration is typically going to be a year.
Yeah.
Is how long this would last. Okay, great. Thank you.
Other clarifying questions? Vice Chair Polgar, please.
Through the chair, well, first of all, I'm going to apologize because I'm having a lot of technical difficulties. So unfortunately, I missed a lot of the presentation. And so I do have one clarifying question. And if it's redundant with something you already said, I apologize. But I wanted to understand in the options that were discussed for kind of the different caps, there was the option for doing a citywide 3 to 4% cap for residential neighborhoods, and looking to these other jurisdictions where they had been able to get that approved. But then there was a discussion about using a 7 to 10% for some neighborhoods. And so I wanted to understand, was there considered like one where it would try to ideally keep it to 3 to 4% in each neighborhood, so that it's kind of so that you don't get concentrations? Because I mean, in looking at the map, there are areas where, like, I think it's referenced in the staff report. And so I was just trying to understand if that was kind of part of those options or incorporated. And again, if you discussed this in the presentation, I apologize. My computer was booting me off multiple times.
So, I mean, I'll jump in on this, and I guess if somebody wants to jump in afterward. So yeah, to answer your question, the 3 to 4% would just be kind of citywide, ideally based on how many how much housing stock we have available. Now, if we were to do something more neighborhood, like the 7 to 10%, one of the things that we have heard from the Coastal Commission is if you offer up 10 to 15%, sometimes per neighborhood, they say that that's not enough, and they'd like more. So like, for example, you have 120 homes and you want to do 10% of that, they're going to ask you for more. So this is just kind of giving you an idea of neighborhood wise. If we did go that route to try to do 7 to 10%, we may be asked to do an increase of that, because it may not allow for enough development or growth, not development, I'm sorry, but more growth. But 3 to 4% citywide is kind of, you know, congruent with like Carpinteria, where what they do have as far as their caps for their overlay areas, which would kind of be similar to our, you know, our main areas of Miramar, Alsace, Arleta, and then allowing for other areas. That percentage essentially would kind of even out realistically. If you did it per neighborhood or you did it per citywide, it would kind of even out overall. But if you did it per neighborhood, then it looks a little bit too restrictive.
Through the chair, if I could jump in just on that point very briefly, there are a couple of instances where jurisdictions have tried to get neighborhood caps. And as Joe said, those neighborhood caps tend to be, when approved, high in the higher range. So not things that are down at 3 or 4%, but things that look like more like 10 to 12 to 15%. And so I think it would be difficult for the city to secure commission approval for neighborhood cap that was as low as 3 to 4%. It may be difficult for us to secure approval in general, but specifically for a neighborhood cap at that level, I'm not aware of any jurisdictions that have successfully achieved such low caps on a neighborhood basis.
Through the chair.
Go ahead.
Just want to ask a follow-up question along those lines. So as again, Sarah, I don't know what you heard earlier, but is the city staff is recommending we don't put a cap in place. But if we do put a cap in place, then you're suggesting that doing it on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis may be problematic. But if we had a citywide cap, that might be more acceptable. The concern I have is twofold. First of all, if we don't have a cap in the downtown core, and then we have a citywide cap, like that's a little bit like, I would assume we would want to have a cap for the parts that aren't in the downtown core. So that's the first clarifying question. The second one is, well, you might have a citywide cap, and let's say if it's 2% or it's 10%, I can tell you that the bulk of those rentals, I mean, if you look at the map of every place that's rented a property, they tend to be in greater proximity to the ocean, to the trails, to public access space that are more desirable. So the concern becomes, we ruin the quality of our neighborhood. So it seems to me, if we're going to have a cap,
well, Commissioner Hernandez, yeah. I just want to ask if we're straying out of the scope of clarifying questions.
I was just asking, so that's it right there. I just want to clarify the concern. The question is, like, do we have some better control in place, some better tool that really helps balance out the number of units that are in a specific neighborhood, especially the ocean view neighborhoods?
If I can just kind of jump in just on one thing, you know, if I know that Sarah, you may have had a little difficulty with your technical difficulties during this part, but if you recall, I did speak to somebody at Santa Cruz County, and one of the major issues they had and why they're going back to the commission is to try to have a cap in these specified areas, like more, you know, more like specific neighborhoods, was incredibly challenging. And now they're likely going to go back and just offer up a flat number, which will ultimately be a little bit higher than what their cap would be percentage wise, so that they can just go ahead and put a flat stop to, you know, over inundating these areas, like these coastal areas. But essentially the real challenge was, but to have these percentages in specific neighborhoods was really, really difficult for them to be able to enforce. And you know, that's one of our concerns that I've heard is our enforcement of how we'll handle these bad actors. And if we've got pick and choose different percentages in different neighborhoods and only, you know, limited resources for enforcement, it does become a challenge and kind of runs away from you. That's based on what I talked to, you know, the Santa Cruz County persons that were working on theirs.
Would it be an option to ban short-term rentals everywhere but the downtown core, since it's a commercial district? Is that an option? Is that something that could be?
Well, maybe that's something we should discuss in the commissioner comment portion.
I'm going to suggest to the chair that when you complete your clarifying questions and the public comment period, we can, I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about the Coastal Commission discussions that we had, not just recently relative to this particular topic, but about short-term rentals broadly, which was one of our topic areas with their staff in working on our land use plan update.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
I have one question sort of along those lines. I think I heard in your presentation, Jill and Joe, that one piece of feedback from Coastal Commission staff was that any form of cap might require an economic analysis to justify it. Is that correct? And did they, so I see you nodding your head yes. Did they give you any hint as to what the scope or point of the economic analysis should be?
I think we know the point. I don't understand the full scope, and what we've noticed in looking at, many jurisdictions in the coastal zone do not have caps at all. So the ones that we presented today are the lion's share of the ones that do. It's not very many. The studies that are done are, they range quite a bit. The point, though, I think, is to ensure that the city is not, or whatever the jurisdiction is maximizing coastal access opportunities, in particular, more affordable coastal access opportunities. Our kind of reasonable perspective on that is that the whole house rentals are very expensive, and that is pretty easy to show. We don't need to do a big economic study to demonstrate that. And the primary residence requirement is going to be associated with rentals that may be portions of a house or a little more moderate in terms of their cost. And that's what the Coastal Commission is looking for, is another slice of opportunity that is more affordable. Things that we've seen other jurisdictions need to do is produce good inventory of the accommodations that are provided in the jurisdiction. So, for example, we have a very up-to-date summary of accommodations in Half Moon Bay in the land use plan with regards to all the different hotels, how many rooms there are, and by class of hotel. We also have campsites and 3 RV parks. And so Half Moon Bay has really a nice range of accommodation provisions, including short-term rentals as part of that portfolio, so to speak, which is helpful. We did notice some of the cities were really struggling to have more restrictive STR regulations in the event that they don't have such a nice range of accommodation types, where they might only really have higher end hotels. Restricting short-term rentals was considered to be something contrary to maximizing coastal access in those places. For Half Moon Bay, where we have more options here, really focusing in on the lower cost short-term rentals is definitely what we see the staff supporting and what we see the Coastal Commission themselves supporting. And that is what is written in your policy in the land use plan. So long answer there, but going back to it, I don't really know what we would be asked to do. And I think it depends on how, on what we came in with as well.
Well, thank you, Jill. That's very helpful. Commissioner Benjamin, you have a clarifying question?
I do. And yeah, I'm going to phrase these in a way that I hope it doesn't sound leading because I'm still debating my own thoughts about them. But mostly they're my usual legalistic perspective. So thank you for bearing with me. The first one is, has been pointed out, we're now operating, or at least we have a certified local coastal program update, but we're still in the 30-day period where it can be challenged. So when we're talking about consistency with our LCP, the legalistic question is, which version of the LCP are we analyzing with respect to? I guess if we're skating towards where the hockey puck is going to be, it must be the updated one. Is that right?
We're using the certified LCP unless there's a challenge that means we can't use it. We are using it. We've already confirmed this with our attorney.
Okay, no, thank you. No, again, no questions, just, or no editorial there, just trying to understand it. Second, in the, again, back in the text of the ordinance, there was a discussion about when short-term rental would not, it shouldn't be in conjunction with a number of things. And one of the examples was commercial parties. And I just wondered about parties that were non-commercial, whether there was, maybe I was misunderstanding the text of the ordinance. If, let's say, you know, it was the end of the high school year and there was a graduation and somebody had a short-term rental and they wanted to have a party. I'm not sure I understand if that fits into the prohibition or whether it doesn't.
I was just going to say, no party, basically no parties. That's what our ordinance is saying. There's no parties. The commercial aspect is we have had complaints before of some currently operating short-term rentals that tend to use their property as a commercial retreat, to where there might be 10 or more persons doing, you know, a work retreat or some sort of physical fitness retreat, but that's just kind of grouped in. But essentially, commercial and residential, it's a no party house, essentially.
I got the feeling that was the intent, but I was just trying to figure out if that's what the ordinance says, and if it does, that's great. Then while that's, we can go back and look at that later, unless there's a quick answer. I'll take that one for now. Then does the short-term rental registration run with the land? So if I have, let's say I register and I get the letter that says, great, you're registered, and now I can rent out part of my house for short-term rentals, and then I sell my house. Does the new guy inherit, or new lady inherit my short-term rental rights? No. And if we were to have a cap, I know that that's not in the proposal, would it evaporate and the next person on the list would be the one who would be able to get it, right?
It does not run with the land. This is not a use permit. This is registration specific to the operator of the STR and the specific conditions of their ownership and use of the property.
It's such a new class of thing that I'm still trying to get touch it. So thank you for bearing with me while I get the hang of it. Another angle on that was the parking exception conversation. And I went back to remind myself of what the parking exception findings need to be, that have to do with essentially the exception is necessary for the use and enjoyment of the land, among other things. And so there's the legal question of what it looks like to buy in a residence, and then say, you know, does it make sense to mount an argument that says, in order to use my residence, to enjoy my residence, I must have a short-term rental, and the short-term rental requires requires a parking exception, as opposed to the parking exceptions we do for the primary residential use. I hope I phrased my question in a way that it fits here. I'm not making a judgment. I just want to understand it.
I'm gonna appreciate punting because I want to reread the findings in the parking code, which I did earlier today, but I think I can answer your question better if I read it with a fresh take from that lens.
Okay, well, thank you again for letting me deal with all these legalistic things. And I am very interested in hearing from the public, so I'll try to shut up for a few minutes. Thank you.
And while Jill's looking that up, I just wanted to say, just based on what I remember from our last meeting, where we even came into discussion about parking exceptions, it actually had to do with a mixed use property in downtown, I think off of Main Street. So I think that's kind of where we started on this. But again, I'll let her find where it is with our code and get a little bit more information for you.
Thank you for that. Do commissioners have further clarifying questions? It appears not. So unless there are objections, I'll go ahead and open the public comment period and ask members of the public who are attendees who want to comment on this matter to virtually raise your hand, please, and Bridget will allow you to speak.
We have one. John.
Welcome, John. You can speak now.
Just need to unmute.
You need to unmute yourself.
All right, let's try this again.
There you are.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you now. You
Okay,
can go
great.
ahead and speak.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is John Ortiz. I live, well, my second home is on Poplar Street, and I have offered that as a vacation rental for approximately 8 years. We spend several months a year in that house. We live over in Palo Alto. We come over frequently, and we rent it approximately half a year, maybe a little bit more each year. I guess two thoughts. One, there was a comment made that there's adequate stock of other types that are available to people. I do want to comment that it is my belief that house renting is actually very affordable for visitors that are families coming to the coast. It's very common for me to rent to a family of 4 or 5 that has several kids and some parents, and they want a house where they can cook and offer these, you know, just the comforts of home versus being in a hotel or in a campground. And so I think that's a very legitimate use case for people, and I think it's frequently rented. Furthermore, I'd say that I run at a very affordable rate in addition to that, and I think that's, you know, I don't think characterizing these things as being expensive is fair. I think this is done in a way that allows me to afford the house and be able to have value out of the property. So that's my first point. My second point is I'm concerned about unhosted. I guess I fall in the unhosted category because I don't live there. But again, there's 2 points there. One is I'm trying to give value to the house and be able to rent it. I don't live there full time. And as a result, I don't think I can rent the house effectively unless essentially we live there and we move out periodically. And I would like to have full use of my property. I'm very conscientious about the way I do it. I usually call every guest and contact them before they're approved to come. I've worked closely with my neighbors to make sure it's not an issue. And I feel like I really have been excluded from the clause, as I understand it, as being a viable pathway to rent my home. I just really think that I've demonstrated, and I imagine there's many others, that we can do a very good job in renting and being part of the fabric of the community, both knowing them when we're there and renting it otherwise. And I wish you would consider that as an option.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ortiz, for that. We welcome comments from any other members of the public who are attending tonight. Don't be shy.
I don't see anyone's wanting to speak.
No, well, I'm reluctant to end the public hearing so quickly, so I'll just.
We have one. Don't quit yet. Oh, okay. I have Rosalind Ramsey, and you're unmuted, so you can speak right now, Rosalind.
Okay, hi there. I have a short-term rental in Half Moon Bay, and I live on the property also. And I've done it a couple different ways where I share space with the guests, and then where I give the guests their own space where I'm not there, and they have their own bathroom and their own kitchen and things like that. And I've done it over the period of like 5 years. And I got this notification just recently, and so I'm not fully prepared. But as being a short-term rental person, but also being very conscious of my neighbors, I think one of the most important things is just to make sure that neighbors are reassured that each person who's running a short-term rental is being responsible and making sure that there's not loudness going on, because even though I own a short-term rental, I would hate to live in a neighborhood that had people out of control and having my peace and serenity interrupted a lot. I'm also familiar with other states that have short-term rentals, and a lot of them manage the short-term rentals by, or not a lot of them. Another one in particular runs their short-term rentals where they've got to have a contact person nearby, 10 minutes away, 15 minutes away, somebody that the person in the short-term rental, if they can't get a hold of the owner, or if they can't get a hold of somebody, there's a designated person. Now, sometimes the owners are very responsive and they can take care of things, but this is I don't really know where I'm going with all this, except to say that allowing people to use their property to make money is a wonderful thing. It provides affordable housing or vacation rentals for people who might not be able to come and stay in hotels. But we also just have to make sure to protect our neighbors so that we can continue to do that, and where people don't get up in arms and then the whole thing gets shut down. That's all.
Well, thank you for your comments, Ms. Ramsey. And please know that the Planning Commission is not making any decisions about the ordinance tonight. So if you feel that you need more time to organize your thoughts and share them with Planning Commission or City Council or City staff, you will have that.
Okay, I feel okay. I just I see both sides, and sometimes being a short-term vacation rental owner, but then listening to neighbors, not my own, but other people's serenity being interrupted, that's not okay. So,
thank you for that.
I think you guys are trying to address that, so that's good.
We appreciate your comments.
Okay, so it looks like I have Susan Sawyer.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to go on record again. My comments have been submitted in the past, but particularly in response to the two previous callers. I live across the street from a short-term rental that is almost entirely occupied by visitors because the owners are out of the area. It is theoretically possible that the owners may use the property from time to time, but they have certainly not introduced themselves to the neighborhood. They don't integrate themselves into the neighborhood. For all intent and purposes, I'm living across the street from a 2-unit hotel or motel because it's a single family residence with an ADU, and they rent out both units. It is very disruptive. I do know that there are several academic studies that have looked at the impact of short-term rentals in communities, and it increases the price of rental properties. And those studies are pretty easy to find, but if you can't find them, I'm certainly happy to help provide for them. So I have some empathy for, I think it was Mr. Ortiz who said that he spends several months a year in his property. And I'd like to see the city of Half Moon Bay try to find a way to have compromise. But for those owners that are out of area investors and their primary focus is just maximizing income at the detriment of the quality of the neighborhoods, I don't really, I have no empathy for that situation. I really would like to see the city of Half Moon Bay find as many barriers as possible. That's really all I have to say on that.
Well, thank you for sharing. We welcome comments from anybody else in attendance who would like to share your perspectives with the Planning Commission. Once we close the public hearing tonight, there won't be another opportunity to speak to the commission until the next hearing. So I encourage anyone who wants to raise your hand, but
Seeing none.
all right. Well, in the absence of that, I will close the public hearing. I know it's relatively early in this meeting, but I'd like to ask the commission's indulgence for us to take a very quick 5-minute break at this juncture. Everyone's okay with that?
Sure.
All right, we'll just be in abeyance for 5 minutes and then come right back. Thank you. Have your hand up?
I do, if you're ready to entertain conversation about this. First of all, I wanted to thank the members of the public. One of the secrets that folks come to meetings like study sessions often find is that their conversation gets a lot more airplay because there are fewer conversations in which the thoughts tend to be diminished. So thank you to each of our speakers tonight. And without diminishing the others, I want to focus for a moment on Miss Ramsey's comments, because I think there was an element in her comment that cuts to the core of what we're trying to do, at least what I'm trying to do. And I think from what I can hear you as well, colleagues, is to find a way to accommodate the visitors who want to take advantage of the short-term rental opportunities without adversely affecting the neighbors, the residents who live there. And the fact that this was brought in conjunction with the home occupation section of the zoning ordinance really underscores that we're trying to, that we're thinking that way, that our idea is how do we facilitate a use that we know is desirable in many respects, but has the potential to become a nuisance if it runs the wrong way. And we have cases where it hasn't, and we have cases where it has. One of the comments that I think came out of the last meeting was the idea that if we were going to not bring really press for really strong limits, we at least wanted to have a clear view of what the signposts would be that would trigger our an awareness throughout the regulatory regimes that we deal with, like the LCP, and if we were to try to have to certify something later with the Coastal Commission, with them and their staff, that would communicate, hey, this, the puck is moving in a place where it's going to have an adverse impact soon. It hasn't, but look at, or we have a hint of it, but it could become much more prevalent. And I just wonder if that signpost idea came up in conversation with the commission, or if staff batted it around a little bit to say, what are the things that would surprise us, that make us feel like we need to take a more aggressive action than maybe our initial version of the ordinance would have, or what are the things that would trigger a contingency if we did plan them into the ordinance at this time? So that's kind of a question.
Would city staff like to respond to that now, or continue on discussion for a bit?
I didn't mean to make it into an oral exam, so I'll continue, but I'll put it out there.
Okay.
So the next question was with respect to how the sanctions worked. I appreciated the comments that Sarah Clark brought to us tonight. Thank you for those. It seems to me that there are at least 3 different stakeholders in the short-term rental. One of them is the property owner. Another is the operator or agent, if you like. And then the third is the renter. And what I'm wondering is if there are opportunities to provide incentives for good behavior on all of them, or disincentives for less than ideal behavior on all of them. I know when I go on eBay and I buy something, I pay attention to the feedback that a potential seller has, or if I'm selling something, the feedback that a potential buyer brings to the table. And I wonder if there's a mechanism that, for a misbehaving renter, if there's a way that we can make them, give them a motivation, not necessarily that it has to be a stick, but some combination of carrots and sticks. And similarly, an operator who may not be the homeowner, seems to me that there might be an opportunity to provide some incentives for them to do the very best they can in achieving the goals that Ms. Ramsey laid out in her comments. I think another way of thinking about this, to generalize about we're trying to manage the impacts of visitors and on residents while accommodating the visitors, is to understand that like so many other kinds of development, the impacts on residences of visitors is cumulative. It's the short-term residents, it's the day use visitors who park here, it's the overnight visitors who park here. And if we look at any one of them in isolation, we might conclude that the impact is de minimis. But if we combine them, it may be that the impact is potentially significant. And I don't mean to be using the language of CEQA because I want to rattle CEQA around here. It's rather that that model of thinking is really relevant to achieving the goals that Ms. Ramsey laid out that I thought were very well stated. And in some places, we are able to mitigate for that. We have nighttime permit parking programs in some places. We pick up trash that visitors leave behind in some places. We have prohibitions on parking because of fire lanes in some places. But treating each of these potential visitor impacts like in a silo, to my way of thinking, it's not going to give us the right answer because there is a dependence. As Commissioner Hernandez mentioned, I suspect that while looking at the map that Joe and Jill put up earlier, there was a lot of the blue dots on the on the west side of Highway 1. My guess is that if short-term rentals really grows and achieves this goal, it may well be that there'll be a further concentration so that it is not uniform even within neighborhoods, that it may be that it moves closer to the western edge of the neighborhood or near a trail in the neighborhood. I don't know those neighborhoods well enough to know that that may not already be the case. But I do think that finding a way to manage this holistically rather than thinking about it in just the silo is going to be important if we're going to achieve our goal. Otherwise, when there's an adverse impact from the neighbor's perspective, they're going to see the car parked on the street and they're going to say, how come my short-term rental neighbor is doing this? And the answer will be, well, that's the day use guy. You can't really complain about that. But there's this interplay that I feel we need to find a way to manage that. Maybe I'll stop there and give my colleagues a chance to weigh in before I go further. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Benjamin. Other commissioner discussion? Commissioner Hernandez, please.
As always, it's an informed and educated discussion. I really appreciate having these study sessions and time to listen to public comments and think about this a little more deeply than just a regular hearing. So thank you for all the work that's gone into this, and thank you to our public speakers who provided their feedback. I think my biggest concerns when I look at this are, we have a new land use plan that's been certified by the state, and we have obligations to take care of visitors from over the hill who come to Half Moon Bay and use our coastal resources. We also have an obligation to protect our community from nuisances, noise, trash, people doing things they shouldn't be doing in residential neighborhoods. I've used short-term rentals. I appreciate them. I think they're good value. I think when done right, it's a good thing for the community. Can be a good thing for the community. I really worry about the depletion of good housing stock. And so I think the purpose of this, of housing on the coast is not to be an investment, it's to provide housing for people who live here. Like, this is not it's not a community that was designed to support just visitors. This is a bedroom community. And so having kind of hit all of those points and say, we've got to strike the right balance here. If it was if we had an ordinance right now that clearly defined all of these things, we'd be able to shut down these bad apples. And I think part of the problem of how we got here with the document, the language that's in front of us is we have a lot of bad apples, and or we have a few bad apples who are really ruining everything for everybody. I'm amenable to some of the existing folks who are using short-term rentals potentially being grandfathered in, provided at the time we do something like this, all the other rules that we would have in place, no citations in the last year, they paid their taxes, they're in good standing. As long as all of those things are true, I'd be amenable to taking consideration into letting non-residents continue to have short-term rentals. But moving forward, I think we really need to draw the line. I don't want to have the quality of our neighborhoods diminished by turning this into one giant beach party. And I think it's important for us to putting in place an actual cap is not really viable, or it's going to be difficult to defend. So it seems to me that moving forward, we need to really, as a pragmatic matter, I would say it probably makes a lot of sense to stick with this resident requirement for everybody who's for everybody moving forward. I want to make sure that when it comes to parking exceptions, we have a few properties we've recently approved, that could be short-term rentals that have parking exceptions. And I'd like to make sure that if anybody's doing short-term rentals, they have the ability to support parking for visitors entirely on their property. So I want to be able to effectively exclude people who we've given parking exceptions to because they want to be able to enjoy the house as housing. We're not giving them exceptions so they can enjoy a house as a rental unit. I'm generally supportive of not having any kind of limits in the downtown core. I like the limits that are proposed with respect to duplexes and triplexes. I think that's a very smart use of those types of properties. And, I would generally be very supportive of encouraging more and more of the short-term rentals to be in the core of the downtown. I think those are important things for us to think about. I do think I would really like to see us, again, shut down these bad apples as soon as possible. I think it's important for us to find whatever means we have available now to block people who have multiple complaints filed against them, because it's just, I'm on Nextdoor, talk to my friends, we've had many planning commission meetings here. It's a big complaint from the neighbors. And again, it's not that many people, but, and you may not be getting all of these at the city, but I certainly get an earful when I talk to my friends and they're telling me about those short-term rentals and the party houses and so forth. So anyway, those are my comments, a little long-winded. Just want to make sure that we're, neighborhoods are for neighborhoods and we can do some accommodating things with short-term rentals. And I'm supportive of that, but I think moving forward, I would insist that we have the primary residence requirement as we've documented in the code, in the draft code.
Thank you, Commissioner Hernandez. Vice Chair Polgar.
Thank you. And I'll apologize because I had to reconnect 3 times during your comments, Rick, but I think I caught mostly the gist of it. And I would second a lot of what you were just saying about your support for the proposed approach in the commercial downtown and the multifamily and mixed use. I am supportive of all of that. And I think I overheard your statement about making sure that the parking exceptions are not extended to beyond the use to which they were originally issued for that purpose. I fully agree with that. I also am very much I want us to keep the primary residence requirement. I think I was one of the folks who spoke out against having exceptions to it. And I think my reasoning is, and I stand by it, is that I'm not sure that I would know as a planning commissioner how to consistently make exceptions. I think maybe I heard Commissioner Hernandez speak about perhaps there's ways to have very clear criteria for existing, I guess they would be another form of grandfathered in short-term rentals who are not, don't necessarily meet the full requirement of the primary residence. But it'd have to be very clear criteria, because my issue with the exception is that I did not understand as a planning, I put myself in the position of trying to be faced with what I would assume everybody wanting an exception. And then how do I make that decision consistently? And what essentially it becomes kind of meaningless to have that primary residence requirement if it's always a request for an exception. So those are some of my thoughts. I did want to talk a little bit about the whole concept of the caps. I don't love the idea of caps, but I think that at our last study session, Commissioner Gorn raised the point of, and maybe others of us did, about having a backstop. And I think that was raised as an option or a consideration in the staff report. And I see the value in that. I definitely do not want us to go down the path of a battle for something that with little return on our effort. Doing an economic, I had the same question as Chair Braddock about, well, what would that economic analysis show us? Like, what are we supposed to show? And I don't want us to have to go down that route. But I think that we could, it sounds like it'd be reasonable enough to be, first of all, we may actually have a sufficient amount of information just by virtue of having just gone through the local coastal program update, that we may be able to make the case for the 3 to 4% citywide. I just will make the comment that it's very odd to me that the Coastal Commission would be, I guess, consistently objects to these higher percentages for specific neighborhoods. That's an odd thing to me, because it seems like that to them would be an appropriate way to, like, that's recognizing that you're trying to balance these different uses. Anyways, that was just an interesting kind of outcome of the research that you did, or what finding from that work. But seeing as that's the answer, and I really don't want to see things like concentrated in certain neighborhoods. I brought this up last time. I think that's, I think that's bad to have it all, concentrated there. But it sounds to me as if there isn't necessarily a reasonable way to move that forward with the Coastal Commission, or at least reasonable as I see it. But I would be supportive of like a backstop cap. And maybe it's not that, and I think I maybe heard you say, Joe, that it was preferable not to do a percentage. It was just maybe better to do a number that was targeted at approximately a certain percentage, and that's fine. I didn't necessarily have so maybe just picking a number that's high enough that but it gives us something, and then definitely monitoring it over time. I'm not going to try to dive into anything else again, because my connection has been really spotty, and so unfortunately I have missed quite a bit, and I'm sorry for that.
Well, thank you, Vice Chair Polgar. I'm going to echo most everything of what my colleagues have just spoken about. I think as we've covered the ground pretty extensively at previous hearings, that short-term rentals can be a benefit to Half Moon Bay residents who offer them in a safe and sane way, and they can be a benefit to coastal visitors, which is important. But the city is entirely right, and in my view, responsible for putting the right constraints on what is fundamentally commercial operations in residential neighborhoods. And I think the current draft ordinance does a good job at this. I support, at this point in time, I support staff's recommendation to not include caps in the ordinance and rather to monitor the state of affairs as we go forward for, I would guess, a year after the ordinance becomes effective. And I'd say that for three main reasons. The first of which is that in our hearings, it seems to me that the big majority, or perhaps all of the concerns and complaints from neighbors that we've heard about STRs has been about the abuses of STRs, the so-called bad apples, rather than the density of STRs in the neighborhood, which leads me to think that, yeah, we definitely, it's a shame that we need a new ordinance to deal with the bad apples. One would hope that the existing nuisance ordinances the city would enable us to bring relief to neighbors who are plagued by living next to party houses or what are in effect motels in their residence. But in any case, I think that the attention, as I said a minute ago, the attention needs to be on controlling the abuses rather perhaps than the density. My second reason is any caps that we tried to be intelligent about right now would be based on the past history in Half Moon Bay. And here we are about to put forward a new framework for future years without knowing what the new ordinance, what reality the new ordinance will help bring to bear. As I believe that our community development director at our last hearing made the articulate point that a lot of factors in the new ordinance, when it is certified, are not really going to encourage a dramatic blossoming of new STRs. They're going to put the brakes on the process for a while, at least. You know, the primary residence requirement, which I think is the single most important part of it, is going to assure that the owners and or operators are really living in the neighborhood and are responsible neighbors. The application and inspection and fee procedure, these are going to, I think, naturally put the brakes on it a little bit. And thirdly, my third reason is I always prefer to not over legislate when there's a reasonable doubt about the right way to go. Having said that, I do agree that, you know, my long distance view of it would be to be sensitive to the densities in the most popular neighborhoods growing significantly and getting too high. And I can imagine a scenario where it would make sense for us to want to go to Coastal Commission with that argument. But I think at this point in time, I would prefer to see us not put a cap in this ordinance and monitor it effectively and be more intelligent about that for the slightly longer term. And I'll go to Commissioner Benjamin now. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to kick off the second round here. So I do agree with you that it rarely makes sense when making decisions about investment. And let's be honest, being a planning commissioner is about planning investments of valuable resources. And I am, you know, like other kinds of investments, stock markets and things like that, it does not make sense to be driven completely by the past any more than it makes sense to drive while looking in the rearview mirror. It's important to look forward. So I'm a fan of that. That said, I think it's important to identify if you like, the rumble strips that are the signposts that and the Coastal Commission, importantly, is going to say, oh, we understand that you're trying to be accommodating, but we see that there is an impact in your community. You know, communities get to have, it seems to me, a certain measure of character. And I think we ought to be able to articulate a good futurist doesn't wait for the bad impact. They identify the things that presage the adverse impact. And maybe it is a high density of applications heading towards a particular community. Maybe it's a large number of complaints associated with a particular area that are related to visitor matters. Maybe it's police reports. Maybe it's all of those things, or some combination of those things, or something different. But I firmly believe that we will not have done our job in this ordinance if we don't leave ourselves a framework for addressing the future, acknowledging what the signposts are. I say that because I've seen other ordinance related to the impacts of visitors in neighborhoods turn a blind eye to those things. And I think we owe our community better. So I'm very interested in the follow-up on what, if anything, the Coastal Commission conversations yielded in terms of whether there is a balance of the accommodation to visitors with the concerns that the residents have about adverse impacts. I'm also interested in understanding whether there are incentives besides those that motivate the owner, but also motivate the operator and the renter. So let me recall those questions, hopefully for some conversation. And then finally, the language we have in the draft that says if there are 2 complaints outstanding, then we're in a different position than we would be if there were no complaints. And I just want to say, I appreciate the intention. There's something really good there. I think there are some kinds of complaints that are more serious and you wouldn't want to let 2 of them go. You wouldn't want to wait for the second one. The tenant had a campfire and we had to call the fire department because something went wrong, or, there was a felony, or, there are things that I would say are much more serious and probably, if there's a 1 strike and you're out kind of alternative for certain kinds of things, that might make sense. There's also a set of violations that are considered victimless in the minds of some visitors who go into a habitat that they ought not be in. The campfire at the edge of the backyard that maybe ventures a little too far out beyond the backyard. So I'm just trying to get a sense of, maybe there are other mechanisms that are already in place to deal with those more serious problems. But I'm really interested in hearing from staff about that and how we manage the possibility of this new stimulation that maybe because there's increased density, we get a different kind of complaint, not one that says this is really irritating me because there's noise, but there's so many people here that we've lost our community character, that we've become sterile.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Benjamin. Commissioner Hernandez?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Jimmy just said. I mean, we've got to take a long view here. And again, part of the challenge we have is the corner cases are what we always have to think about when we're doing planning. I'm always nervous about over-regulating and being Kafkaesque in the policies we put in place. So I'll leave the details and thinking through how do we make this pragmatic to staff. But I think what I've seen so far is pretty close. And I'm pretty comfortable with what I've seen. I would like to see an annual report to the Planning Commission and or the City Council, but I definitely want to see something come to the Planning Commission about the short-term rental program, how it's working, and as part of that report, a recommendation on let's keep it going as is, or we should have a hearing item. I'd like to see something like that on an annual basis, because right now we're we're kind of taking a low cost, pragmatic view. But the problem with being a frog that's being slowly boiled alive is that you don't realize the temperature in the water is going up. And so if we don't have some kind of check on at least an annual basis, this may get out of hand pretty quickly. And so that's my concern is we may have scofflaws doing things that we don't want as a community, or we may have better policies and better examples that are being set by other parts of the state that we can cite. We may have more informed commentary from, our housing authority or from the coastal commission that helps us come up with better policies. But I think this is something where we should look at this actively on an annual basis. I think it's really important because, again, to me, we live in a small town. It has a special feel, and we want to protect the character of our town. And I will, again, say I am sensitive to the concerns of people like Mr. Ortiz, who's my neighbor just down the street, and he has a beautiful house, and never heard a peep from anybody there. I'm sure those people are enjoying the property, but we have to take the broader view for the community. So I think I'm pretty comfortable with where we're at so far, and I think I don't have anything else to add at this point.
Well, thank you. I want to say I agree with Commissioner Hernandez about the need for active monitoring. I'm quite optimistic that what's in the draft ordinance will go a long way to reining in the abuses of short-term rentals, but we do want to have a distant early warning or an annual monitoring system to be perceptive and be aware of what is happening with the STR densities in the most popular neighborhoods and throughout the city. Commissioner Benjamin, I wanted to say I appreciate your ideas about incentives for the stakeholders. It occurred to me that the hosting platform gives fairly explicit feedback about short-term renters and the operators of such. I have to admit I can't think of anything off the top of my head that the city might do in addition to that, but it's certainly worth thinking about. Vice Chair Polgar, did you have a comment?
Yeah, actually, to follow up on your thoughts on the feedback, I too it wasn't necessarily clear that something that the city per se would do. I will say that those platforms, you aren't hearing from the neighbors. So it is possible that you would have an opportunity from the city to, as part of a check-in, to survey neighbors. I realize that I don't want to invite if there's kind of I don't want it to become kind of an issue where it's treated as like an enforcement by any means. But I wonder if that's something that could be incorporated into consider like a review, is talking to neighbors about, and maybe it's an anonymous survey. So just a thought, an idea to add to Commissioner Benjamin's thought on that. I guess, I don't have a strong feeling in terms of setting a cap now or having a trigger mechanism to identify the need for it. I guess my concern would be if, I can't remember who was talking about this, but if things, I do see that I very much agree with Chair Ruddock about how this
we've lost Sarah for at least a moment.
Through the chair, while we're waiting for her to return.
Yes.
Since I heard a lot of comments about skepticism about how we would apply parking exceptions, I did not speak to that. I just wanted to add that I concur. Sorry, Sarah, you were gone.
You froze up, Sarah, for a minute. Sorry.
Sorry.
Not your fault.
It's not your fault.
I am not sure what the last thing you heard was.
Well, rewind 60 seconds and
Okay.
happy to have you continue.
All right. I guess what I was talking about was the caps. And I very much agree, Chair Ruddick, with what you said about not having that. I think that this ordinance will actually slow things down. But I don't know that for sure. And so I think it'd be good to have a trigger mechanism in that we would use in looking at this in a year out, for instance, or to help us pause, for instance, if we suddenly see that things are going in a different direction. Those are my thoughts. So I still am supportive of having a trigger mechanism, like a trigger that you would, help you identify if things are really we're getting so many requests that we're looking like we're going to, certain neighborhoods, for instance, are just getting overrun. And because I very firmly believe that 10% of a neighborhood in short-term rental that very much that really changes the feel, and it's much less of a community feel to a neighborhood feel when that is the case. I think even with this the residency requirement, it still feels like just like it's a hotel kind of situation all around. So and I realize that the Coastal Commission would likely push for much higher percentage, but I still think that it would be nice for us to have a kind of a real, like if we're reaching something like that in a neighborhood, to at least bring it to the Planning Commission and so that we are aware and can immediately start to think about if we want to address that with a citywide cap. But I don't necessarily need the cap to exist from the start, is I guess what I'm saying, which is in support of, I think, Chair Broddick, maybe what you were proposing.
Commissioner Hernandez.
I'm supportive of something like that, or even a moratorium on more rentals in a neighborhood until we can come back to the Planning Commission and figure out what new policies should be, with the understanding that, look, we're putting something in place that's pragmatic and short term, but things can get out of hand pretty quickly. So I'm in favor of some type of trigger mechanism where we can just put a hold on any new short-term rentals coming into a neighborhood if it goes above a certain threshold. And I know that it may need to be, again, it's a temporary moratorium and it's not like permanent. It's just, we need to agendize something, look at this, figure out what we need to do as a community. I think, if there's a way for us to finesse that without having to do an economic study or spend an inappropriate amount of money looking at it, I would be all about something pragmatic like that.
Well, maybe this is a good point in time to ask city staff if they have perspective on that. But from my amateur viewpoint, I would be a little concerned that getting Coastal Commission to approve triggers would be just as difficult as getting them to approve caps. But Jill, do you want to share anything on that?
We are ready to give you a range of responses, if that's okay with you, and we'll get to that one probably last. So Sarah Clark is going to start, and she's going to answer the parking finding question about parking exceptions, and also discuss a bit more about violations, serious violations, and working with neighbors. So Sarah, take it away.
Scroll back to my section on this. So as Commissioner Benjamin noted, one of the findings for making a parking exception is that the exception is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of substantial property rights of the petitioner. And the question was raised as to whether short-term rentals are considered sort of a substantial property right. I would say that if you are continue to support including a reference to the parking exception in the short-term rental code and suggest that parking exception is available for short-term rentals, then in making those findings, you would find that short-term rental is considered a substantial property right. And you would then move on to the other findings, looking at whether the property is sort of has significant constraints that are unlike other properties that justify the parking exception. I think the example we heard at one of the study sessions was a situation where there was a historic resource on the site that sort of prevented the property owner from building additional parking, but the short-term rental was located in the downtown core where parking might not be as, or will be more readily available on the street. So that I hope provides an answer. You can certainly decide to take out that reference to the parking exception or indicate that no parking exceptions are available. But if the language is coded as it is now, I think that you would be able to make that finding. The second question that I wanted to address was what about sort of one strike for really serious violations? And I wanted to note that we already have something in the code that would address that situation. So short-term rental registration can be revoked if there is the activity has caused or is causing a serious threat to human health or public safety. So I think the example given where the short-term rental allows significant fire hazards could certainly rise to that level and be revoked in one instance. Also, I would point out that through Title IV, there are other options available to the city that are beyond just the registration revocation for these sort of serious health and safety impacts through nuisance abatement and other things. And then finally, on Commissioner Polgar's or Vice Chair Polgar's suggestion related to the survey, I'm not sure that an anonymous survey is going to be something that is sort of possible to codify here. But one thing that I did want to point out is that in doing code enforcement actions, there's a sort of data gathering component to it where neighbor outreach is a component of that. And so there's certainly opportunities for neighbors to be involved in the process, particularly if neighbors are making complaints about a particular property. So I think we should feel assured that neighbor feedback will be incorporated into a review of these troublesome short-term rentals. So I think that is all I'm going to cover, and I'll hand it back over to Jill. Oh, Commissioner Hernandez.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we covered this before, but do we have the right to block a short-term rental site from operating or offering listing properties in the city? Is that something that we're allowed to do?
You mean entirely?
Yep.
In what context would you be hoping to block them, or for what behavior?
Supporting bad actors. So is there a way for us to apply a 2 strikes or 3 strikes policies to the short-term rental sites so we can have a means to have them help police this behavior, as opposed to, again, us as a little city, it's kind of hard. We don't have a lot of enforcement mechanisms, right? And is there a way for us to, dissuade the platforms from having bad actors?
Yeah, so if a hosting platform refused to take down a listing that, where there wasn't a registration available in the city after we told them to, that certainly brings the hosting platform into a violation of municipal code. I think where jurisdictions have really struggled is then how to go about enforcing against large tech companies. And so you've seen a couple of larger jurisdictions try to do this, and I will just caution that it tends to be sort of an out and out battle, and it can end up in very costly litigation. So I think the approach that has worked well for jurisdictions, at least at this snapshot in time, is that the majority of listings are still coming through the most popular listing sites. And those entities thus far have been quite receptive to working with jurisdictions to take down bad apples. I think that after some of the really like well covered incidences at party houses, like the shooting that happened in Orinda a couple of years ago, and some other really, acts of violence that are caused by these party houses, the major hosting platforms have realized that they need to offer jurisdictions help in addressing these problems, or there was going to be a more significant crackdown. And so since that time, they've been much more willing to work with jurisdictions on getting listings taken down. It's these more rogue entities that are harder to address. So sites that aren't as popular or are more transient in nature. I hope that answers. It's probably not entirely satisfying answer, but I want to give you a realistic picture.
It's helpful. I mean, it's important for us to have context, right? I mean, we've got to put the onus on the owner as much as possible. There aren't a lot of other viable alternatives, and just, it really comes down to making sure whatever we have in place has enough teeth that it dissuades people from bad behavior.
I think it's accurate.
Through the chair, just to jump in on this one point, what
Yes,
about?
please.
Thank you. What about incentives or disincentives for the operator?
So I mean, the main incentive or disincentive for the operator. Well, first I would note that you used the term, or you raised the point that the owner and the operator would be different, but with a primary residency requirement, I just wanted to note that the owner and the operator have to be the same entity. So, I mean, they could use a management company potentially to list it, but it's not as though you're in a situation where this is an investment property and the people are never there. So with respect to any manager or operator of the property, I mean, I think that the real incentive comes is they don't want to get the registration revoked for the person that they are operating the entity for. And that's the key incentive. I'm not aware of any other positive incentive programs from other jurisdictions that would entice people to comply. Unfortunately, I think this ends up being a little bit more of a stick system in terms of how we move forward.
So
thank you. I'll hold my other comments.
So through the chair, I was going to continue on with our responses, and we'll have a little bit more about primary residence, a few more thoughts about incentives, and signposts / triggers that you've been discussing. So we heard a little bit of consideration for primary residence possibly to be something that is not required for maybe grandfathered units. We do want to revisit where we came from with our study sessions previously. In early February, the first version of this ordinance had a starting point for you to think about, which was for a 3-year transition period from not having primary residence to moving into primary residence. And it also included a use permit exception process. And we got really direct feedback on both of those to reduce the 3 years to 1, which is something that we've seen in other codes, and we're very supportive of. We think it's a perfectly reasonable amount of time, and we spent quite a bit of time. You really talked about that a lot. And then the feedback on what really are the criteria for a use permit in this case. Commissioner Vice Chair Polgar brought that back up again tonight. So that's why we came back with what you're seeing now. I think it's important just to reflect on that a little bit and let us know if we shouldn't stay the course with where we are, but that's kind of the path that we were under. Sarah just covered a little bit about the limitations for incentives. I really don't see a role for the city to get involved with providing some kind of incentive to private businesses other than like if you had a green business program and they got an award for it, or, you know, something that was more of a across the board type of thing. I think it would be very difficult for the city to do anything beyond those kinds of sort of civic programs. The rubber hits the road with good reviews and what you can charge. And that's the incentive. We also think the stick of nobody wants to get visited by the sheriff or by Joe. As delightful as Joe is, when we get complaints, that's what happens. And the visit is to property owner and or operator and or the renter. And it works pretty well, except for the fact that we don't have much on the books for what you're looking at here with the ordinance. So I think as Sarah has communicated to us, she has not seen incentives in other cities. So I guess I'm at a loss, and if Commissioner Benjamin has intention about that, an idea about what that might be, that could be helpful. I'd be really concerned though about our ability to apply them. We're going to have enough to do with this, and I just want to be careful about our expectations around that. Moving on to signposts / what we were thinking of as triggers, where we're seeing there's a problem, there's something that's building up, and it's along the lines of some of the things that you've talked about tonight, in particular with overconcentration, cumulative impacts that are hard to measure in a holistic manner. We do believe that the primary residence requirement is going to take care of a lot of that and be one of the tools for holistic management. We don't know what the impact of the ordinance is going to be in terms of how many short-term rentals will be in Half Moon Bay. We've been very upfront about that, but let's just remember the most we've ever had was 104. Joe has been tracking this. Currently, there are about 45 that are active right now in Half Moon Bay, recognizing that a lot of them have closed because of the health order. That makes it even harder for us to have a sense of what the demand is going to be. We do expect the demand to remain very strong. Clearly, visitation to Half Moon Bay has done anything but let up. So that's an important part of it. But without this ordinance, what's been on the books is really a bit of an open season from the land use perspective. And we're not expecting a significant spike in densities, even in the neighborhoods where you saw, the 6.5% of housing units that are being used for short-term rental. A lot of those are not. Let me back up. A lot of those are with a primary residence. So, and we're not getting complaints about them. You heard a speaker tonight who operates hers as a primary resident, and had two descriptions of how she's able to pull that off and qualify, and would actually be completely supported by this ordinance. So with regards to triggers, we have seen this in other cities' codes, and they basically are like a go back to go. If you hit a trigger, you go to your city council. So we wrote about triggers in your staff report. We're encouraging you to think about triggers and wanted to hear about that tonight. So we're glad it came up. Where Sarah and I were thinking about was we would suggest that it be part of an uncodified portion of your ordinance, but it's by ordinance. You'd be passing it, or council would. Therefore, it would be in the record that goes to the Coastal Commission. They wouldn't have to, codify and have us codify the particular trigger, but it would be very clear and in the record that the city is concerned about this. And it could be number of STRs overall. It could be about density in neighborhoods, or we could add in some of the things that Commissioner Benjamin suggested, that complaints or some kind of degradation or serious types of activities, like the fire example is a really good example. And we think we could come up with something very strong that would serve that purpose. The issue of needing a moratorium, that can happen. There are very specific findings about when it's appropriate to do so. And I know Sarah is very versed in this. It's a pretty high threshold, and it can be done. Urgency ordinances are absolutely a tool that you have, and it doesn't need to be in the code. This is something that is available to the city based on judgment of what is actually occurring. So we just want to share that with you as well. And if we haven't answered some of your questions, please let us know. But that was my list. Thanks.
Thank you, Jill. Very, very thought-provoking. Commissioner Benjamin.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the helpful answers. I had several thoughts that I wanted to elaborate on. First, when you were talking about no one wants a visit from Joe, I had in mind a very humorous video education. No one wants a visit from Joe, and then there's a visit from Joe simulated. I have seen in the real estate industry, they have galleries of, who they feel like are the really high performers in their field. And I'm not qualified to judge the motivations and the choices that they're making. But, maybe if they form a community organization and they're self-policing enough, maybe they can provide some of their own carrots. I understand that there are limitations there. So I felt like I had to ask. It's not that I knew that I had intention about what the carrot could actually be. If they were just, models, maybe they become mentors for other short-term rental people, and that builds up their steam in the field. And, I don't want to make it sound like a multi-level marketing organization, but trying to find some way of thinking about this that is useful. And I appreciated the comments about the one strike. As usual, Sarah brings a helpful perspective. I also appreciate Jill's comment about the need for signposts, or what I refer to this time as the rumble strip. And it occurs to me that if the first time we see the problem is when we have that many STRs and it's causing a problem, then it may be too late. That may not be a signpost. That may be the sensation that we have run into a ditch. And so I'm thinking perhaps there are earlier signs, for example, a sudden mushroom in the number of applications. It may be that as a matter of due process, and again, I defer to Jill and Sarah on this, that once an application is in place, you can't, the horse is out of the barn, and shutting the door at that point may or may not be helpful. So maybe there's we're watching the applications and the way that they, the absolute number or their distribution across different geographic areas, things that would, the problem with signposts is you never really know which ones are going to matter, but you want to give yourself the flexibility that you're paying attention, because otherwise you get caught up in the day-to-day transactions and you lose track of the long-term picture. And here we have to be futurists. We have to hedge our bets. We have to be extra aware. So those are the kinds of signposts that I am thinking about. I also appreciated the recognition that people's perceptions of STRs is part of their perception of how visitors impact their community. And to the extent that we can manage the overall impact, maybe we do indirectly manage the impact of STRs. So I'm hopeful that there's a way of thinking about that that's different than the way we do it now. But I am interested in what, if any, feedback the Coastal Commission offered in terms of a sensitivity to the impact of visitors, whether they're just saying, we're maximizing coastal access and you're going to like it. Maybe that's where they are.
Through the chair.
That was a question, by the way.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that because that's actually a point that I'm interested in. Like, if we allow, if you will, open season in the downtown core, but much more tightly regulated outside of the downtown core, with the purpose being that the downtown core is visitors serving, is that something that would pass muster? That's the kind of question I'd like to get an answer on, a very specific question.
Well, let's take Vice Chair Polgar and then maybe Jill, you'll have a response in a minute.
Thank you. And thank you for the responses and the information in response to our questions. Couple thoughts. I very much appreciate kind of that nuanced approach of doing for incorporating triggers and ways to identify those without having it be coded into I think it was, you referred to it as maybe uncoded, but part of the ordinance. I actually wasn't thinking of having triggers that would be coded. I was thinking more along the lines of, I think what you were suggesting, something that would allow us to flag. And I hear what Commissioner Benjamin is talking about, like, what are the things we want to be flagging? And I definitely think that if you're seeing density, and so if you see a huge influx of applications, I think that, seeing a big, growing a much faster rate of increase in certain neighborhoods, things like that, like you get 5 on a block. I mean, things like that. And I think those are all worthy of bringing it back before a year, I guess, because I just didn't want us to wait a year because I feel like if things went out, like we keep talking about, like once I think, once it's out of the gate, like we all think and I fully agree that I think it'll slow down, but just in case it doesn't, there's a part of me doesn't want to wait a year and so I really do want to flag some of those things in advance. I'm not a huge fan, and this may be I may not be on the same page as some of my fellow commissioners. I'm not a huge fan of trying to go back and get more answers from the Coastal Commission. I feel like staff has done that, and we've gotten the answers we're going to get. And I think that we're not going to hear anything we like better necessarily. For instance, I think it's a really reasonable thought to think, suggest, hey, we're proposing a much higher density in an area that fully makes sense. It has all the visitor serving needs, that commercial downtown. It's pragmatic. It makes sense. I get it. I just think that the staff, from what I'm seeing, staff has really done the due diligence. And I don't want us to keep going without, and I feel like we have I don't want perfect to be the enemy of the good in this case. And I think that we may be kind of, tilting at windmills to try to get us, get some of these additional, more specific restrictions that would really be well suited to protecting our coastal community character in specific neighborhoods, for instance, and things like that, but may come at the cost of the kind of the time it takes to get that, and potentially, frankly, creating ill will that, and I'm worried that we get a backlash. And so I feel like you've done a lot, like staff, I'm saying, I think has done a lot of due diligence. I also heard that the staff who are available to provide information on this perhaps aren't going to be able to answer these additional questions necessarily in any more depth or with any more kind of creativity, for instance. So that I get that we want, like, I always want to know more and find out, you know, like look at different creative options. I'm just not sure we're dealing with an entity that is particularly good at fielding kind of and working with that kind of in that kind of way collaboratively in new realms in this way, unless you go the legal route, and I really don't want us to go the legal route.
Through the chair, I want to disabuse our vice chair of the idea that I'm asking them to go get more information. I'm asking what we know.
Well, I heard, yeah, it wasn't, I'm sorry, it was, I didn't mean to imply that it was just, I was responding just to you, Commissioner Benjamin. I had heard this also from Commissioner Hernandez just now. And so that was why I heard it from both of you about wanting to go back and hear what the commission was going to say about this. And my feeling was like, well, we kind of heard what the commission. So I was just encouraging us perhaps to not wait around or think that we would get better or more information. It was a minor point. If staff feels that it's valuable to go back, I totally yield to whatever staff says is best in that regard. You're the ones dealing directly with the Coastal Commission staff. So I didn't
and as always, I would trust to city staff. I agree with Sarah's point. I mean, like, I'd like to know the answer to that question, but if city staff thinks it's not a good use of time, okay, that's fine.
Well, Vice Chair Polgar made good points. I see the advantage of an approach like the uncodified trigger system. For one thing, it would put Coastal Commission on notice that we are concerned about the gathering storm, sort of a tornado watch out there. It occurs to me, though, that the metrics will be important, and it will be great to have a version of this map which shows the active STRs, those that have been granted, those that have passed through the process. And I think that'll be some months down the road, probably late 2021, by the time the ordinance gets passed by City Council, certified by Coastal Commission, and applicants of the existing and new STRs start to come forward.
Yeah, sorry. I was hoping to give you some more information so you can keep chewing on this a little bit more. So first of all, thank you, Chair Reddick, for bringing up the point about kind of that startup time. With everyone having to register and having a 6-month period to allow for that to occur, we don't have to wait a whole year. And we will have a good sense of if there's a deluge, we'll know really early the first year if there's a big concern, and we can figure out a way to kind of monitor that after that. But the startup period really should be a very good education for us all, and we can certainly report on that as a first point about, hey, we've got 90% of them seem to be registered, and we're working on the last 10%. That kind of oh, I think we just lost Commissioner Polgar. Bridget, if you can help her get back on one way or the other, that'd be great. Oh, she's already here. Look at you. We lost you, but you're back, Sarah. Okay, so that idea of don't wait to monitor and come up with a metric that is it's fait accompli and it's already happened, and here we are in our stew that we didn't want to end up in. So the point is well made. We understand it, and we'll work on how to address that. The whole discussion around what the comfort level is with Coastal Commission staff and the Coastal Commission is really an important context for this. We talked to the staff specifically about our draft ordinance. They're very interested in it. They've also spent a heck of a lot of time working on a 480-page document review for the land use plan approval certification that just happened. So I think it's really important to reflect on what's in this book and how it relates to this ordinance. And I do believe it's directly relevant. So first of all, short-term rentals specifically, there is, you now have a policy in Chapter 2, Development, Policy 2-76, and it discusses, in fact, where it lands in the text is important. It comes up in the residential land use designation section, and it's right after the home occupation policy. We were making a point to Coastal Commission staff about commercial uses of residential neighborhoods in Half Moon Bay. We believed that it was really important for the staff and the commission to understand that Half Moon Bay's residential neighborhoods were not established to be blocks and blocks of vacation homes. They're not that. They're places where people live, and they're fully intact neighborhoods. And so it's different than other towns that are really were developed to be vacation places, and that is not how Half Moon Bay was developed. There certainly were some of that going on, but really the bread and butter subdivisions and neighborhoods are their neighborhoods, and the whole impacts around home occupations was not lost on anyone, and that came up tonight again as context for this. That is why these two policies sit next to each other. I can tell you that we spent more than one meeting with this policy language on the agenda when we talked to Coastal Commission staff about our land use plan. They're very concerned about over-regulating short-term rentals, and that's why you're seeing the work that we've done with Sarah on bringing something that we think is consistent with this policy, as well as really in line with what Joe needs, with what our neighbors need, and with what our operators need to have these businesses and supplemental income. Now, the bigger context, though, around both visitor serving uses and lower cost visitor serving uses is also addressed in the land use plan in Chapter 5, Coastal Access and Recreation. There's very strong policy about supporting visitor serving uses and about the need for lower cost uses. And it's, again, consistent with the primary residence intention that we've brought to you. And then finally, back to Commissioner Hernandez's comment and wondering again about what's going on with the core. Is there some acknowledgement about that and not having as many restrictions there, and the direction that you were moving in as we've been reviewing this through these study sessions? Absolutely. The whole section about the town center in Chapter 2 about walkable mixed use, flexibly used spaces is all covered in there. And I really think you have a lot of consistency all the way through in terms of concentrating on your development in the downtown, being more comfortable if it might be a little bit louder or a little bit busier, or have some more street parking because we have a mixed use park once and walk kind of environment in our downtown, as opposed to the neighborhood settings, which is different. So I think that construction from the land use plan is supporting the direction you've gone in. We also think it will help us when this ordinance goes to the commission, because they're gonna analyze everything about it. They're gonna really spend quite a bit of time on this. I don't know, but I don't expect this to be like, we had an ordinance a couple of years ago that was without a hearing. Sarah, I think you wrote it. I think it was the ADU ordinance that they recognized it conformed to state law, and the executive director requested that it move through. It wasn't a minor amendment to the LCP, but it moved right through. This is the sweet spot of the Coastal Act when it comes to coastal access. I think they're going to be really quite focused on what it means as a whole and what our intent is with this ordinance and how it works with the policies that they just certified in the land use plan, and that you worked hard on, and we tried to represent the city well with them. So it's a long-winded answer, but we got more out of the land use plan discussions on this topic than we did in coming back and having specific pointed questions about details in the ordinance. That really wasn't fruitful.
Thank you, Jill. That's, I'm sorry, Sarah.
Continue and then I'll go.
Oh, I was just going to ask if the caps in the coastal communities, which Joe presented, did they all undergo Coastal Commission certification?
Yeah, the only one that hasn't right now is the proposal from Newport Beach for the 1550. This has just gone through their city council and planning commission. So that's why they don't actually have a cap in place, but everything else, yes.
Well, thank you. Yes, I'm remembering now you mentioned that, but it's interesting to have those data points as examples of things which have met the okay of the commission. Commissioner Benjamin.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not muted. Good. So I just wanted to thank you. That was a helpful response. I guess I need to learn the new Torah here of the new LCP better, but I think it makes sense to me to ground them in that context. I think the direction that Rick raised, which was to encourage the STR development in the downtown core and understand the different context in other communities, makes a lot of sense to me. That is a place where parking could be more difficult. I tend to be more favorable towards accommodating parking in that downtown area than I would in other places. I think I heard that from several commissioners. That may even be unanimous. I want to be Commissioner Warren's, be the echo of him from the last meeting, and just say, the ability to respond quickly to unexpected things is going to be key to what it's like here 20 years from now. So I really, however we do it, our ability to say, wait a minute, we have 45 STUs and we have applications in 1 year for twice that. That would be a wake-up call that something was up, or even double it would probably be a wake-up call. So I am certainly appreciate staff sensitivity to that. I think if there were, I think that the Coastal Act does call for managing visitor-resident conflicts as well as our LCP. And so, I don't think the goal here is to be exclusive. I think by and large, we're quite a welcoming community. And I'm certainly it would be sad if somehow this concern were twisted into there are a bunch of whiner residents out there who are trying to be exclusivist. That's not the case at all. And I hope that in finding the balance that allows us to direct the growth where we want it, as we've described in the LCP, and does a good job of protecting the other resources. I think there is an opportunity to move forward. And to be clear, I am not asking for staff to go back and try to get pre-approval for something that we're cooking up. I am not asking that we, fold our arms and be intransigent. I am well aware of the experience that Malibu had when they refused to provide coastal access maybe 15 years ago. And that was not and will never be, has never been my way of thinking about this. There's a middle ground that allows us to manage those impacts without hearing the war stories that we have heard from neighbors, and I am determined to find it.
Well said. My apologies to the Deputy City Attorney. I meant to come back to you.
Thank you, Chair Reddick. I just wanted to provide one minor addition to Jill's helpful outline, and hopefully to answer Commissioner Hernandez's direct question on this idea of concentrating short-term rental activity in the downtown core and restricting it elsewhere. And I just wanted to note that one of the key items that the Commission has repeatedly said in considering short-term rental caps or bans is that they really don't like efforts to restrain existing activity. So I would caution that any effort to tamp down on historic use of short-term rentals outside the downtown core would likely not pass muster at the Commission. Efforts to incentivize short-term rentals in the downtown core, which I think we have some existing disparate treatment between the downtown core and elsewhere in this existing ordinance, we could go further, I think would be fine. But any ban in particular or strong restrictions below the sort of historic levels, I think would be difficult to get past.
Yes, if the ordinance does not require primary residence in the town center, that would be a pretty strong incentive. I'd just like to echo what Vice Chair Polgar said a little while ago. With the perfect being the enemy of the good, I do think that this ordinance is going to do a great amount to improve our management of STRs, and I think we ought to want it to become reality as soon as possible, while we perhaps put in the other tornado watch system with the uncodified approach that city staff and city attorney have mentioned. Any other points of view from commissioners?
Through the chair.
Yes.
I hope that nothing I said suggested that I wanted to delay that process.
No.
Thank you.
No, I don't think anyone harbors that feeling, Jimmy.
I want to thank everybody for the hard work. This is there's a lot of homework's gone into this, and we couldn't have set ourselves up for a better time to put this into effect. We now have some very strong policies that will provide air cover for the things we're doing here. So thank you to everybody for your hard work.
Indeed. Maybe I will ask city staff and city attorney if there's anything else would be valuable for us to weigh in on before we move on.
I just think it's important for us to revisit next steps. One of the things we'll do now is Sarah's going to do a very detailed legal assessment of the code to make sure that all of the interconnected pieces are crafted correctly. You may see a few things move around. We understand what the scope of the code is right now at this point. I don't think that we heard for anything new in the draft code other than something uncodified, and we will from the planning side, work on triggers, and we will give our friends over at the Coastal Commission a shot across their bow so they just understand where we're coming from and kind of the timeline for it. We think we could be ready to come back pretty quickly, possibly your second May meeting, May 25th. Anyone who's been interested in this item really should be receiving Planning Commission packet agenda notices. Joe's been sending emails to all of the registered operators. Anybody watching tonight hopefully has made a connection. They figured out that we're still doing this. We're announcing it in e-news. We're getting the word out, and we'll make a concerted effort to do so. But with a public hearing, there will be a newspaper notice and additional mailings. So there's quite a bit of work that goes into that. So just thinking about when it's coming to you and what it's going to look like. It'll look a little bit different than what you saw tonight, but I think we've got it, and your feedback has been excellent. We really appreciate the discussion about caps and all the rest of the guidance, and we'll look forward to seeing you at a hearing for this.
Excellent. Well, yes, thank you to city staff and city attorney's office for all the diligent work and research that's gone into this. I think we'll move on to the next agenda item then, Jill, which is your director's report.
So there's just a little bit been going on. We're very happy about the local coastal land use plans certification on April 15th, obviously, and understand that probably quite a few of you were watching, and I heard it described as a sigh of relief across the land. And we actually felt that at City Hall, and we're already working on our work plan, of course, for implementation, and we'll update you about that when we're ready to do so. We don't have an update tonight. For your next meeting, agenda forecast, I'll just go one meeting out. May 11th, you're going to see the capital improvement program. This is for general plan conformance finding. The city engineer will present to you, and that's something you do every year. And we also are preparing a study session for the Main and Kelly mixed-use development proposed at the old gas station site, kitty corner from Mac Dutra, right across the street from City Hall. It's been through a couple rounds of Architectural Advisory Committee review, and it's not quite done with that, but we thought it'd be a good idea to show it to you before it's fully cooked through the design review process. And we're looking forward to having you see it, and also that really the platform that the Planning Commission gives. We know the public's really interested in this project, and we think it's very important for people to have an opportunity to see it being discussed before this body. We have quite a few things just going on with City Council for typical end of the fiscal year. They're going to be seeing their budget. They finished their priority setting sessions. I've got work to do on our consultant contracts, and there's just kind of the ticka work. You'll see us bringing that through council over the next couple of months. That includes updating our fee schedule. That's done every year. It's not just for development fees, it's for all the fees that the city charges. Many of them have a index applied to them that just makes an adjustment annually. And there's a process around it, and a notice. There's a 60-day enactment period. So there's a lot that goes into that. That's on our plate right now. We are preparing to bring the accessory dwelling unit ordinance to City Council. sooner than later. I don't have a confirmed date. As soon as I do, we'll let you know that. It's in pretty good shape. And let's see here. On April 21st, we had a hearing, a director level hearing for an addition, and it included a second story addition as well as a deck. And so it kind of hit our threshold for when we have an administrative item versus having an item with an actual hearing. And it was at 225 Valdez, and it's been approved. There were design revisions made by our applicant at the staff's request, and they really turned out nice, and the neighbors liked it, and it was a very positive hearing last week, so we're happy about that. We did have our housing meeting on the 14th, the evening of April 14th. I think a couple of you were in attendance for the breakout session. This was the Let's Talk Housing, being supported by the 21 Elements group. It had kind of a plenary presentation for all the different folks who came to the session from lots of different cities. And then Brittany and Scott and I were in a breakout room where we were able to present and field questions. It was really well attended, thoughtful questions. We were pleased with that. Last week, I don't know if any of you went to this one. They had the All About RENA session. It was really informative for everyone. I sat in on it just to listen. It was not interactive. It was a presentation, and people could ask questions through the chat. About 100 people were there. I don't know how many were Half Moon Bay. I wasn't in the panel, so I couldn't see all the scoop on that. But the questions were great, and I think that presentation has been recorded and will be publicly available. So if you didn't see it and you want to learn more about this topic, I'd encourage you to take a look at it. You can fast forward and get through it more quickly. But with the housing element coming your way over the next year or so, this is a really good foundation, and it's a good training component. There were a lot of staff people there too, and we all know about RENA, and we've used it before, and we understand how it works, and we know the process. It was still helpful for us, so it's really good. And I think that's enough for director's report tonight. Thank you for indulging us in updating you. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you, Jill. Commissioner Benjamin, do you have a planning commission communication?
Actually, it was a director question. And that was, we are approaching an era where people are vaccinated. I love our virtual hearing convenience. I miss seeing you all in person. I'm not pushing to have it happen sooner rather than later, but is there a model for when we start meeting in person again?
We're studying it. First we got to open City Hall, and we're getting hopefully close to that. And clearly, whatever model might be appropriate for such public meetings is going to be appropriate for City Council as well. And yeah, we agree this as soon as we can do it safely for everyone, where the comfort level can be really respected. I think that's good. I've thought about it a lot. I wonder about needing to use the Adcock space just so we have more room. If we still have to have a lower density kind of seating spread out. I really don't know yet what those rules are going to be. We've seen such a variety of things going on with the health orders. And I would also say we're not going to be the first city to do it. We don't need to. let's watch a couple others, and we'll get there. And
this is not the sound of me advocating.
I didn't think it was. We just don't want to be pushing anyone until they're ready. We're really happy. Most staff are really, they're going out there and getting vaccinated. They're figuring it out. It's not easy. we're getting it done.
Excellent. Any Planning Commission communications tonight? Commissioner Benjamin.
You're muted, Commissioner Benjamin.
Thank you. Sorry for that. This is just a heads up that I am likely be out for at least one and possibly 2 meetings in June. My dog and I are taking a road trip across country. I'll meet my wife on the other side because she doesn't drive well. But have good meetings in June if I don't see you.
Well, we will miss you if that comes to pass.
Thank you.
A funny little short anecdote about RENA. A month ago, I attended the League of Cities Planning Commissioner Academy, and one of the sessions was titled, "You've got your RENA, now what?" And after about 10 minutes, the first 3 questions in the chat were, "What's RENA?" So it made me think that the conference people could have written slightly better descriptions of that panel.
I had one comment. So I just wanted to thank everybody for their work on our land use plan, in particular city staff, and the many people who we brought in as experts. I think this was a yeoman's job, and my colleague Commissioner Benjamin, who joined me on the subcommittee, we got to witness in greater detail a lot of the hard work that city staff put forth and the thoughtfulness with which these things were done. So I just want to say thank you. And when we're in a place where we can have a COVID safe event, we're happy to host something for staff and our fellow commissioners at our house. We have some space that people can be separated on and operate safely. But when we're at that point where we can do something safely and people are vaccinated, we're happy to have a celebration, because it is important to celebrate a milestone like this. It doesn't happen very often.
Very, very good of you. I personally have regretted several times since April 15th the fact that we can't be together to celebrate, because it is indeed historic. Well, if there's nothing else, I suppose a motion to adjourn would make sense.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Benjamin seconds it. And I won't forget to ask Bridget to do a roll call.
Commissioner Benjamin?
Yes.
Commissioner Hernandez?
Aye.
Vice Chair Polgar?
Yes.
And Chair Reddick?
Yes.
Meeting adjourned.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Be well.
Thank you all.
See